when you start a company and you're onboarding, you're really happy, you're engaged, but then somewhere along the line, the engagement starts to lag.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, and is sponsored by Leumi Tech, Hippo Insurance, Turing, Upwist Labs, and Hillel at Stanford. This episode is all about work, the future of work. Meet Paris Petgrave, episode 290, co-founder and CEO of We Love Work, an app which helps companies build happier, more resilient teams by solving their recruitment, engagement, and retention problems. She has worked as a consultant and built products and services for a number of large, multinational organizations, including Barclays, Harrods, Virgin, Mastercard, and NHS. In 2017, she was listed as the top 100 EM Power leaders in the Financial Times and a rising star in the Power List of 2018 and 2019. Paris Petgrave, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
All the way from London. I'm very lucky to have you. We're going to have such a fun conversation about the meaning of work. You're the CEO of We Love Work. But we actually found out that we have a kind of an interesting background together. I'm calling from Tel Aviv, and you actually spent quite some time dealing with the Israeli ecosystem. So tell me about that.
Oh my goodness. It was actually one of the major things that inspired me. Guess what? I've read, the book. Before I started We Love Work, I read Startup Nation, obviously.
Right.
If you don't know the book, you must read Startup Nation.
100%.
So I was always intrigued about Israel, basically from a historical standpoint, and from this whole culture that you have in the kind of machine for startups. And I was so lucky. This was way back in like 2013. To get to meet, John Medved, and obviously, if you guys don't know, he's a pioneering investor in Israel who set up an amazing crowdfunding platform, probably one of the first, to be honest. And I used to bring groups of investors over to Israel for a brilliant kind of tour of the ecosystem, along with a lovely holiday. Because obviously, if you haven't had a chance to visit Israel, stunningly beautiful, a lovely place to visit. It's got so many amazing attractions on a tourist level. And I was just amazed at how, the ecosystem worked, how, from a very young age, from university age, tech talents like properly headhunted and, incubated. So I was able to see, all of these different incubators and how, people came up with ideas and how ideas were cultivated and how, entrepreneurship is so much promoted, so much celebrated. And it was very exciting. And it was a very early stage of the kind of ecosystem as well in terms of what John was doing. See, he's doing wonders now. But he's an amazing character. He's one of my biggest inspirations, to be honest. He definitely had an effect on me as an early kind of founder, and not really in the tech space, to be honest. I was just mesmerized by his charisma and his passion for startups and his relatability. We'd have little bits of chats, and, he's just very kind of cool guy. And in a very male-dominated it can be kind of like feel a bit, imposter syndrome sometimes for women in the tech space. I felt very much at home in Israel. And I really did admire that about the ecosystem. So that's my kind of little story.
I love that. And then we have to have one more fun story before we dive into We Love Work, which is that you DJ for fun. I am so terrified of seeing those big, boxes with all those little pads. Do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy, making art with that?
Well, it's so interesting. And again, this is another thing that, I got from Israel in some ways. They have a very amazing dance scene, and if you ever get to visit, hopefully we do, post-COVID. But, the whole kind of Tel Aviv scene was super cool, and obviously Ibiza and stuff. And I visited a few of those places, and I was like, wow, this is so amazing, all these big DJs and everything. And I was like, well, I need to find a hobby to do, because obviously, as an entrepreneur, you can sometimes get so sucked into work that even going to the gym or doing any exercise, you kind of like, oh, should I do, should I work on business strategy or should I go for a
Right.
run? You kind of like, it's difficult to get that balance. So I was like, I must commit to something that I can learn, that I can do, that doesn't affect, like, I can do in my home. And it gives me a bit of a challenge. And I thought, well, DJing, actually, I can buy the equipment and I can be in my room on my decks kind of doing things. And it just seemed like a great opportunity. And I started doing it not too long ago, but over lockdown, it was a godsend because obviously it kept me occupied for hours.
I love that.
So I think, DJing is such a fun thing. I think, if you've got the space and you invest in the equipment, it's brilliant because you can make your own music and, you can just have fun with it. And, it's a really good thing to learn. So I would definitely recommend it as a great hobby.
I love that. I want to pick your brain on a few different subjects. They're all revolving around this idea behind we love work. So maybe before I go into those different verticals, can you share with me a little bit about what you're doing with We Love Work and how you got to build this organization?
Yeah, definitely. So I've always kind of been entrepreneurial. My family's very entrepreneurial and all have their own businesses, and they were always pushing me to go into business. Although I wasn't 100% convinced, because you never really want to do what your parents want to do. It's not so cool. You kind of want to go against that. So I never really was fully convinced. But I got to a certain age, and I was like, okay, I tried a few different things. I tried to rebel a little bit and kind of fell into it. And I started off by doing some investing and also building out some companies around consultancy. So we were doing consultancy, I was doing headhunting. I started headhunting for some quite big major corporations, pharmaceutical companies and so on. And, it was really an exciting time. And then I was doing sort of tech recruitment and headhunting in like large pharmaceutical companies. And I was doing a lot around recruitment. And one of the things that I found when I was headhunting these, C-suite execs who were amazing, really like superstars in their organizations, and I was trying to coerce them into another organization. And on some occasions, these brilliant, amazing people, I would place them into organizations and they would just hate it. And they would be like, Paris, this isn't for me. And I'd be like, what do you mean? This is an amazing opportunity. I got you like so much more money. Like, what do you mean you don't like it? And it was always it wasn't because they couldn't do the job. It was because of the culture. It was like, this isn't the right place for me. This isn't the right fit. And obviously, from a selfish perspective, I was like, oh my God, like, I'm not going to get my commission. What do you mean you want to leave? Because obviously when you're headhunting, you have like a certain period of time that the individual needs to stay. And I was like, no, please stay a little bit longer. But sometimes it was just so off that they were just like, no, I don't want to ruin my career by staying here. Wow. I'm just going to quickly jump out within the first 3 months because then I won't even have to put it on my CV. It was a wrong decision. I'm going to go somewhere else. And in those times, I felt really bad, first of all, because obviously they'd made the transition and it had kind of almost failed. And second of all, I was like, what can we do to solve this problem? Because, it's not that they don't have the skills. It's not that they're not superstars and amazing in their current roles. What is that thing that just makes them like not be able to kind of perform or fit in or engage or just be happy in that specific working environment? And just started to explore that a lot more. I was working with a lot of business psychologists and started to do a lot of assessments around like hiring and stuff. We started to, create some methodology around like measuring culture within organizations and measuring values and attitudes and behaviors of the individuals we were placing in those organizations and doing that manually. And then a friend of mine who actually is very much heavily involved in the tech industry was setting up an accelerator and was talking to me. And, they were saying, Paris, what you're doing is really interesting. You should look at productizing it. And I was like, really? And they were like, absolutely, you should look at productizing it because I think that, there's an opportunity there. And I was like, that's so interesting. Although I haven't come from a tech background, I was obviously, we were doing a lot of it manually, but I could understand, the process and the benefits of productizing because obviously our challenges were definitely time constraints and so on. So we started to put together a product and, we started to test that product with our clients. We started to get some traction around that. And then I guess I just all of a sudden became a tech entrepreneur and started to kind of build a team around that, and actually, raised a pre-seed and went to the States and went to an accelerator and, engaged in the community. And it was so interesting because in that time, a few years before, it was probably about 3 years before I was working with investors and stuff and going to Israel. So I already kind of had the seed planted. But again,
Right.
as a non-technical founder, sometimes you're a bit kind of skeptical and you're maybe a bit fearful, or maybe you have a little bit of, imposter syndrome. Oh, can I really do this? I think it wasn't until like a lot of my, techie friends had said, look, I think there's something in this and you should look at productizing it. They were giving me loads of books like Lean Startup, and, I was reading all about kind of lean methodology and all this.
Right.
I made
Right.
tons of mistakes, like horrible, horrible mistakes, I had to learn
I
the
love
hard
that.
way. As you know, I
Amazing.
built so much product. The first stage, we just built like so many features and just too much. We didn't keep it lean. I got the book too late, to be honest, on the first leg, because you just don't think like that until you're
Right.
taught.
Right.
As a tech founder, you're taught to to be lean, to get your customers first, to look at your sales strategy first, and so on and so forth. And it's really, really, it's really interesting. Once you kind of get that first stage, and then you're like, okay, no, I'm going to do this the right way, and learn how to build out your marketing strategy, your go-to-market strategy, think about your customers and all the rest of it before you start building huge amounts of product. So yeah,
Amazing.
it's been a great learning experience, and I've been really lucky to have some amazing people around me to support me and stuff like that. And you're always learning, even if if you're a technical founder, you're learning the sales piece. For me, I already had the sales piece, so I was learning the technical piece, the product piece. It's always good to have a great team around you and navigate. But it's it's the future, and I think there's going to be so many people going into entrepreneurship who are going straight into technology-based startups, because
100%.
obviously the key thing now is, okay, we're going to create an app, we're going to create a product. So
Right. I think that one of the things that I'm curious about, and I want to hear more tangibly about what We Love Work does and how you work with people in that regard. But first, talk to me a little bit about what it means to have a purpose-driven career. So you touched on that as a pain point that you discovered more as a headhunter, and you've noticed that people are not fulfilled, and you're wondering, why aren't they happy? Why aren't they satisfied? Why aren't they engaging the way that I would expect them? Because everything on the paper said that they should be engaging, right? So talk to me a little bit about some of the insights that you've understood throughout these years from your experience about what does it mean to really have a purpose-driven career, and what are the different, forces that come together to make that happen?
yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, one of the things that, really made me love my role as a headhunter is, the satisfaction that you get when you able to support someone and walk them through, getting an
Right.
opportunity that they're really, fulfilled in. It's life changing. I think we spend majority of our lives working, like when you think about it
Yeah.
from a percentage basis, we're at work most of the time. So that place needs to be a happy place. It needs to be a place where you're connected. And so many times, obviously, money's a huge incentive, but it's not necessarily the bottom line. And there's a lot of research actually
Right.
now that with millennials, it's much more of a purpose-driven thing. That's what's really attracting people, that people want to work for companies that they align from a values perspective. It's not just about the money if you're not going to be treated fairly, or if the company's not going to care about the environment, or if the company's not acting
Amazing.
ethically. There's so much more to the way that people are choosing. And, pioneering companies like Glassdoor kind of opened the review space. And now you can actually
Yes.
employ a brand. That was a huge thing that came about, where people, employers now have a brand for, attracting talent. So actually, as an employer, you have to be very conscious about what you're putting out and how you're coming across to potential talent, because, the labor market is competitive. Um, you know, Many people say it's all about your team, and if you've got A players and you've got the best people, you win. That's as simple as that. It's all about the people. It's all about who you have. And so it's highly competitive, and companies have to think about that. And that way culture became something that was very good. And God rest his soul, there were so many pioneering people that, really pushed and drove culture as a thing, because before it was kind of this wishy-washy thing, and it became much more of an important thing.
And obviously, we've seen in the past 3-4 years how critically important it's become. We've seen in 2020 how pretty much every single CEO from the pre-seed stage to the pre-IPO stage, they were tested with what they're doing and how strong is their culture, because it's being tested in times like these, right? It's not tested in the happy hour. It's tested when shit hits the fan, and now you have to deliver the right messages, and you have to see how people are responding. So I want to make sure that we also have enough time to talk about We Love Work and how you work with businesses to really make sure they're drilling down on what's important for their employees, retention, engagement, and really provide them the skill sets to not do what you experienced, back then. So how does this whole thing come together?
Absolutely. So we are, so nowadays when we purchase a product, when we buy a meal off Uber Eats, immediately there's an opportunity for us to post a review or give feedback. When we have a conversation with our cell phone provider, or when we have someone come around to deliver a service, immediately we get a ping on our cell phone, and they're asking us to provide feedback. Now, the culture of feedback has been massive and has really impacted customer engagement. But we haven't really seen that in the workplace. What we see is, here's an annual engagement survey, fill it in because your boss tells you to. But actually, what's it actually saying, and what's the impact of this? So we really wanted to kind of, evolve the engagement survey to something that was very much a better user experience, much more engaging for employees, and actually enabled them to provide continual anonymous feedback on things like the culture, things like inclusion, things like how they're experiencing, the workplace, things like what's motivating them and what's incentivizing them, things like, are they happy with their compensation? So we're bringing a culture of continuous feedback to employees, to workplaces.
Right.
And we're using that data to help companies drive an engagement strategy. So rather than saying, this is what I think our employees want, it's actually coming from the employees, but it's coming in a much more engaged way. So traditionally, normal engagement surveys probably are only going to be completed by the people in the organization that are engaged. They're not going to be completed by the people that aren't engaged, right? Because I'm not going to fill out that survey. And that's a problem in itself, because we're only getting 10% of the picture. So we need to solve that problem. We need to get the vast majority of the organization engaging in these, opportunities to provide feedback, so that can really navigate a targeted engagement plan that can help people become happier, more engaged, more productive, and actually stay for longer. And there's a huge cost benefit in that for an organization, because it's hugely costly to lose people, and it's hugely costly to hire them again. So again, the value proposition is, the happier and more engaged your people are, the longer they're going to stay, the longer they're going to be committed. And, that's the value proposition from really having just like a customer engagement strategy, we need an employee engagement strategy, and it's super important.
Right.
And I think you're right, especially now, because of lockdown, because it's very democratized now. We're all at home with our laptops. Right. We don't have fancy canteens. We don't have pool tables. We don't have all the bells and whistles, right? So what are our organizations really doing from a cultural
And so how do you actually build the trust with the employees to be truthful? Because the really interesting pieces of information here are the ones that employees might feel uncomfortable sharing with their managers, with the CEO, right? I'm guessing that part of the problem is that people aren't communicating in the right times, right? When an employee sees that something is bothering them or something is wrong, then they don't immediately necessarily go and report it. They let it, sit there, wallow in it, and then eventually they say, okay, I'm just not happy about this because it hasn't changed. Well, obviously it hasn't changed because nobody talked about it. Now, obviously, I'm sure that some do talk about it, but what I'm hearing from you is that the problem you're solving is this communication problem, and providing these data points to the decision makers so that they can simply adapt. They can know what's happening on the on the ground floor of the company.
Yeah, it's almost as if we're creating this kind of continual response. Like, how are we doing? Because you could have a really bad week, and then you can have a really great week. So having an annual survey, or having like a biannual survey, isn't really doing anything. But by the time you collect the data, it takes you 6 months to analyze it, and then you've got a plan to execute. probably half your team have left, or people that were really disengaged are looking for other jobs. So we need to close the gap between signal to response. What are your employees signaling about your culture that needs to change, like quick time? How can we pull back people that are kind of going into that? Because, when you start a company and you're onboarding, you're really happy, you're engaged, but then somewhere along the line, the engagement starts to lag. And this is across the board. I think, globally, only like 15 to 20% of employees are like highly engaged. So all organizations face these challenges, but where there isn't enough data, like you quite rightly say, is and when this sort of thing starts to happen, and what things, like sometimes it could be change, sometimes it could be, that people are going on lockdown and now they feel, well, what's to make me, go to work for a competitor, because, now I haven't got the canteen, or I haven't got the drinks on Friday. What's keeping me here? So I think there's a lot to say about the way that we collect data, how quickly we collect it, and not only just collecting it for collecting its sake, because that's another frustrating thing about, feedback tools. It's about having an engagement plan. So we support companies to create, engagement plans that actually they can act upon and actually, be able to make positive and actionable change. And I think when employees start to see that, it will completely shift the culture. So there's a whole life cycle here that we're tackling, not just the data collection, but the actual actionable change. And then we actually enable them to monitor the impact of those changes on retention and engagement. So we're looking at the whole life cycle, so that we should see change. We should be able to see much more, high levels of engagement, and, again, trust and authenticity and high levels of response from employees. We want, the least engaged to be actively, giving feedback. And we want, there to be this kind of whole level of transparency that I think, in some companies they've managed it, but we've still got a lot of work to do.
Amazing. Paris, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. This was wonderful. I really, really appreciate it. I think that you're touching on a problem that is just growing, and there aren't enough people that are dealing with it. And I'm very happy that you are. And I think that it's extremely worthwhile, and I think it's extremely complicated. And I can't wait to see where We Love Work goes. So thank you very much for coming to speak with me. Before we leave, I have to ask for the most important question, which is 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Oh, 3 words. Loyal. Very loyal. I am committed, and I think I'm a happy person.
I love that. Paris, thank you so much, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course.